hands. Ooh, we got Thought Seizes and Growth Spirals for Reid Duke. That is a good set to get. But Cats, Priests, and Woe Strider, as well as an eventual collected company on Seth's side of the battlefield. Oh, and Seth greeting Reid Duke with a hello. What nice
That was actually
spiders.
a pretty close keep from Reid because there wasn't actually the mana to cast these Growth Spirals. Most of the lands in the deck would do it, so especially on the draw, it's fine to keep it. But it was worth noting.
Yep, got that breeding pool, though, so golden on getting blue and green mana.
Yeah. It's a tough decision here because the Black Source is Castle Lochwain, so decides to kind of keep up Aethergust in case there's a Mayhem Devil coming. And that way you get to Growth Spiral. Could have chanced it by going, for example, Growth Spiral and try to hit an untapped Black Source. But most untapped Black Source would deal damage, so that would be taking 2 on top and then taking 2 for Thoughtseize, whereas you could probably wait a turn. Seth's hand is loaded, so you're going to be able to take something relevant later.
So Priest of the Forgotten Gods has 2 friends now, which means your sacrifice ability is online. That's going to make it very tough for Reid Duke to stick any creatures to the battlefield.
Thankfully, Reid's plan is... There is Doom Whisperer, but generally Reid's plan is to get rid of the board first, and then we can stick whatever creature afterwards.
This would be a great time for Languish, Scry of the Carnarium, or anything of the sort.
Yep, not cards that we have access to, so we might see Reid pick apart Seth's hand here with Thoughtseizes, because Priest of the Forgotten Gods can generate mana, so even this Collected Company can actually be pretty threatening just because the Priest gets to essentially use the mana. However, with access to Aethergust, you might want to leave that Collected Company in hand, because if Seth decides to sacrifice 2 creatures to Priest of Forgotten Gods and cast Collected Company, Aethergust is particularly potent here, since Seth casted off less than 4 lands. So, I mean, for me then, Reid isn't just thinking about what this Thoughtseize is, it's also thinking what's the second Thoughtseize maybe going to take, because you could pass with Growth Spiral and Aethergust up rather than casting this Thoughtseize.
That's true. There's also Growth Spiral if Reid Duke's willing to take another 2 damage to shock that in.
Yeah, this is a lot of damage just from your own hands.
When you go, I think the first one was not shocked, but if you go shock, shock, skip, and then shock, that is a lot of hurting yourself against an aggressive deck like Jund.
Plus Thoughtseizes. I mean,
you gotta pay it. You gotta pay too every time you take a peek at your opponent's hand.
Yeah. And that's why these decks historically have not been good against aggressive decks of this nature before sometimes. But one key difference is that you have access to Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath that really undoes a lot of the damage Thoughtseize does and makes it that much better.
So Seth is trying to figure out, do I attack in with 2 of these creatures? I see that there's some potential for leaving back both Priest of Forgotten Gods, and Seth sees that too, especially with, all of that good future mana. I also like the idea of doing the Collected Company on Reid Duke's turn, even though it skips a landfall, which may have happened if draw had resulted in a land in hand.
Yeah, this is going to be, by the way, a really spectacular turn for Reid.
Yeah, I see that Cry to Carnarium.
Right. I mean, the card's good, but it's going to combine really well here because essentially, Seth doesn't really want to fire Collected Company against Cry of the Carnarium since there's only Mayhem Devil that isn't a total disaster to hit off of it. And then you still have access to Thoughtseize and Aethergust. We're still definitely going to see...
Gods. Yep, activating, sacrificing the Cauldron Familiar and the other Priest to get, let's see, that's a Witch's Oven. And with 2 mana, Floating Collected Company can be cast right now.
Yep. Once the Cry resolves, you get to essentially cast it afterwards with the mana that's floated. But Aethergust is very good here.
The company's going to look at the top 6 cards and get up to 2 CMC3 or less creatures if it resolves. And it looks like instead Collected Company is going to be gusted, and it has to go onto the bottom of the deck here with only 2 mana. It's not like it can be recast anytime soon. Following up with a Thoughtseize, and sure, Claim an Oven is a way to steal your opponent's stuff and sacrifice it, but not that much value right now.
Yeah, and I mean, Doom Whisperer is pretty immune to claim the Firstborn, so...
I know, it's not little. It's a 5-mana card.
Yeah. I think here decides to take the Witch's Oven because it's the most likely way to lose in the long game. The free 2 body is not really going to do much against the card Doom Whisperer. Oh, well. that's a pretty good insurance policy.
Yeah, just to follow up your Cry the Carnarium in a turn with another Cry the Carnarium. And that's really nice against Woe Strider because unlike Thought Seizing a Woe Strider where it goes into the graveyard, Cry the Carnarium would mean that it is gone for good and it can never be escaped.
Right. That's also why the Cauldron's Familiar went away. Really potent. And yeah, this is a bit unfortunate.
Oh my god, the value! I bet Reid is feeling so good seeing this board build up. Admittedly, the Woe Striders could sacrifice each other to get the Scribes, but since they died that turn, they're going to end up in exile.
Yep. And this is 6 damage a turn. I mean, it's a free turn clock.
And there is one flyer in Seth's deck. It's the goose.
Sure. I think if Seth is trying to survive a Doom Whisperer with Gilded Goose, that's not really a winning line.
No, it prevents 2 of the 6 damage once, and then it dies.
Yeah, at least you get the food, so kind of 5 of the damage mostly.
Yeah, that's true. You get to snack on the food token if you have the mana, but Seth is only on 3 lands.
Yeah. And Reid not even doing the surveil of Doom Whisper at 8 life because knows about those 2 claim the Firstborns, and at 6 life, you might be in a position where Seth could top deck a 2-drop or a free drop with a land, and then just combine that with claim the Firstborn to deal haste damage. So by not surveilling, that line is taken out.
Oh, no, that is just a Witch's Oven. Looks like Jegantha is going to go to hand, which is just passing the turn.
Yeah.
And in 2 more attacks from that Doom Whisperer, Seth is going to be out of this game.
Yep, and you have access to Eliminate, so there's literally no card in Seth's deck that would do anything. Like, as you mentioned, Gilded Goose would maybe give you a turn, but not more than that.
And Seth knows it. So we're going to go to sideboarding.
Yeah.
Definitely some choices you expect. Languishes and Ley Lines, very nice against Jund Sacrifice.
Yep, very potent cards indeed. Leyline of the Void is interesting because a lot of people just view it as a way to shut down Cauldron Familiar, and it obviously does that. But the other key thing it does is shut down Midnight Reaper, which is a really relevant free drop in a matchup like this where the Sultai player is trying to outcard the Sacrifice player. So Midnight Reaper is a perfect way to kind of come back. We actually saw a match where Nassif essentially came back into the game thanks to the power of Midnight Reaper and almost won if it wasn't for top deck Yashar. If you haven't watched that game, by the way, round 10 between Andrea Menguchin and Gabriel Nassif, watch game 1. It's very good.
It was great. We were in the chat room together in the green room, just going wild over the top decks. Like, oh my god, another Mayhem Devil, another Queen of Firstborn, and it's Yasharn!
It's so good. But yeah, so one of the things is Leyline of the Void, because it's a replacement effect, because it means that the cards never go to the graveyard, they go to exile instead. Midnight Reaper becomes a free 2 for free mana with no additional text. And that's part of the power of Leyline of the Void. I have seen, though, other games where Leyline of the Void does almost nothing just because, well, I made a free and a Dreadhood Butcher and they just attacked and you didn't have actual removal for some reason, so you're dead.
Well, since Seth Manfield is on the play, we do see all 4 of those Dreadhorde Butchers ready to come down on turn 2 and hopefully get in some cheap and easy damage.
Somebody was wondering why Nassif boarded out a bunch of 1-ofs. So you see here a Cauldron's Familiar, a Priest of Forgotten God, Witch's Oven coming out for Seth, and probably another card that wasn't captured since we see 6 come in. Is, well, what you're trying to accomplish is Your combo pieces are good in singular form. Sometimes, obviously, 2 ovens with a Coldest Familiar is okay, but you generally want 1 of each combo piece. So that's why you see often these players lose 1 of each combo piece, because if you have a Priest of Forgotten Gods, the second one generally doesn't generate much. You don't want multiple Coldest Familiars often. Multiple Witches Oven can lead you to not having a board presence.
So once again, Reduke opening with a hand that doesn't have blue mana for Growth Spiral. Seems to be a theme here.
Yeah, and also, like, most Growth Spiral hands are keeps. This is the only reason Reid is considering this hand, is Growth Spiral is that potent a card. However, as you pointed out, this hand doesn't have blue mana, which is a little, not necessarily the easiest to have. And on top of that, if your first play of the game is going to be a turn 4 Doom Whisperer, that might not get the job done on the draw. And so a lot of things need to go right? That's one aspect I do when considering mulligans, is too much has to go right. This is perfect, though, because you mulligan to 6, you get rid of one of the ley lines, and you get to put the other one in play.
On 3. That is a nice keep. Hopefully, Reduke will get a card to play by turn 2, but still just lining up a turn 3 Uro. It's not bad. And here comes Dreadhorde Butcher, swinging in and growing to be a 2/2.
Yeah, that was a nice pickup for Seth. Otherwise, I mean, Priest of the Forgotten Gods is fine, but it wouldn't have dealt damage. And yeah, Seth picking up Blooming Marsh just on time as well. At least you get to curve out. And Reid does need some kind of interaction. Doesn't need much, but does need some.
Woe Strider adding itself to the board, giving some protection if there were removal targeting the Butcher. It means that you can sacrifice in response. And now it's Uro. Uro entering the battlefield, drawing a card, putting a land into play, and gaining 3 life. The 3 life is going to be relevant because the aggressive start Seth Manfield has is honestly kind of scary.
I mean, you could easily beat it. The problem is you got nothing. There's no interaction. And I think Seth is going to keep that to have Collected Company, so that if Reid gets to play the sweeper next turn, you'd be able to restock. Dreadhorde Butcher is pretty good here. It's worth pointing out, though, that it won't deal any extra damage upon death just because of how Layla of the Void works with it. But still, I mean, it's just a slick Firewalker back from Mirrodin. It's fine. It grows over time. It's just a threat.
So there's only one creature with haste in the deck, the Dreadhorde Butcher. Do you think that there's any merit to a sorcery speed first main phase Coco during this game?
I mean, yeah, definitely. It's a consideration. The main issue here is, I think Seth is putting the position of, if I get a Dreadhorde Butcher and attack for 1 extra damage, it doesn't really do much. And if Reid has the Cry of the Carnarium, that was just bad. I just lost my Collected Company. Whereas if Reid has the sweeper, you get to essentially reload a Collected Company. Now, if Reid doesn't have a sweeper, that means you have this board state and board presence, so you're probably ahead. So missing the 1 damage isn't going to matter. So it's kind of like, hedging and going, well, there's a risk here, but I want to go for the best chance. Now, that was a pretty expensive flash, but
I liked the not attacking and respecting the 4 mana. Did shock in the Overgrown Tome, so it was very obvious that there was Coco mana being held up, and got a Scavenging Ooze, a 4 mana Scavenging Ooze. It's a good card in the matchup. It can munch up that Uro that's in the graveyard.
Yeah, it can at least grow to a free, which means it can rumble across this land. So that is 10 damage potentially coming across. And Seth gets to, just keep on pressure. The only issue is Seth's board is very vulnerable to a sweeper, because Reid is not playing Extinction Event, but is playing Languish and Cry of the Carnarium. Cry of the Carnarium would be okay here, even though Seth probably presumes that Castle Lochwain might go down against Scavenging Ooze. I think here, though, with this attack, it's very tempting to just let it go, unless you want to trade Castle Lochwain for Scavenging Ooze and kind of prevent Claim the Firstborn from being relevant down the line.
Now, the Scavenging Ooze only gets better over time, so I don't think that it's the worst target. But this is going to die.
Yep, and it's actually pretty tight. I think Reid was considering part of it, and I don't think Reid can beat the card Claim the Firstborn unless a a Languish gets drawn. So I think it's completely fine to just ignore the existence of Claim the Firstborn in this spot for now. Basically going like, look, if you have it, you're probably good.
Auto tapper trying to strike right there. Got to make sure that the double green mana is held up for Scavenging Ooze to maximize the value. And there's a nice little Maelstrom Pulse in hand. That is some notable removal. And if the Dreadhorde Butcher dies, it does not deal damage because of the Leyline of the Void.
Yep. So that's actually really key. Without that Leyline in play, Reid would pretty much be dead in this spot. Could use Maelstrom Pulse to just get rid of the 5/5. Only issue with that is that it's pretty weak, so to speak. It doesn't do much else, and you're still facing more damage. Could play out Hydroid Krasis. That is extremely vulnerable to a Claim the Firstborn, but Claim the Firstborn might have been played last turn as well, so you might be safe from it. It does block the Woe Strider and the Scavenging Ooze cleanly, and you have a Castle Lockwing to sacrifice the Priest of Forgotten Gods as well. So it must be pretty tempting to go for this Krasis, but especially for X=4, but it would be taking an additional point of damage from the Overgrown Tomb and not having access to interaction, because if this Krasis is done for X=2, you might draw a 2-mana interactive spell.
Going for the X=2 Hydroid Krasis. This way only one card is drawn, 1 life is gained, but there is a 2 power blocker, which can at least body that Woe Strider.
Yeah. And this way, if there was a 2-mana interactive spell that's black, you would have at least had access to Overgrown Tomb. Obviously, Seth's going to get rid of Uro while the getting's good.
And Scavenging Ooze munching up the graveyard to ensure that there is no fuel for future Uros. With those Doom Whisperers, it's good to be proactive. Use up your extra mana and clean out the opponent's graveyard, so just in case they hit a future Uro, they won't have as much to escape it with.
Yeah, right, indeed, if you have the spare mana. And one important thing, Midnight Reaper was stopped by Leyline of the Void mostly. Mayhem Devil isn't.
No, those sacrifices still happen.
Right. The only problem here is that Seth would have to sacrifice quote-unquote real cards. It's not like a Goat, it's not a Cauldron Familiar that's going to come back eventually. So, but if you play Mayhem Devil here and use Priest of Forgotten God's ability, you get to essentially clean up Reid's entire board, because you get 2 triggers from Mayhem Devil that can get rid of the Krasis, and then Reid would have to sacrifice the castle. And then you basically have free reign to attack whoever you want. It's just that you have to use up cards. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised to even see Mayhem Devil get sacrificed here alongside Woe Strider to essentially clear the board, deal 8 damage, plus 2 from Priest of Forgotten Gods, plus 1 from Mayhem Devil's ability. That won't happen because the creature's not in. But that would put Reid down to 5, potentially.
It's a nice board clear, but it is an expensive one. Does give 3 mana, though, to play another Woe Strider or a Midnight Reaper after the sacrifice occurs. And it looks like the 2 sacrifices are Mayhem Devil and Woe Strider, leaving the Scavenging Ooze there so it can munch the graveyards and get bigger over time. 2 damage from Mayhem Devil, destroying the Hydroid Krasis, and the sacrifice on Castle Lockwing.
And this does allow more pressure. And now you have a 5/5 that's immune, well, soon to be 6/6 that's immune to Languish. And Cry of the Carnarium just won't do enough. That's a Cry of Carnarium plus Maelstrom Pulse is going to do an okay job of cleaning up this board, able to take down the Dreadhorde Butcher, and then you can play Cry of the Carnarium. And with no creatures in the graveyard, that would leave Reid at a virtual 2 life and a virtual 1 with Cauldron Familiar. Not a good spot to be in, but you still get to play Magic and hopefully draw out of the situation.
Yeah, Scavenging Ooze doesn't have any creature targets because there are no creatures being exiled or no creatures going to the graveyard for Seth. They all go directly into exile. So it's still going to be a 3/3 if that's the move that happens. But looks like with only shock lands, Reid Duke would need to take 2 damage in order to cast both spells, and that would still mean the ooze is lethal.
Have I missed something? I thought Reid could survive there.
No, he could clear up the board for everything except for the ooze. And that ooze is a 3/3, and you know what happens when you're at 3 life? You died 3 damage.
Wasn't Reid at 5?
He was at 5, but he had to shock in a land.
Oh, okay.
The classic
we were missing a... Yes, of course.
Pain
land. Those shock lands always get you.
Always get you when your deck is 80% shocks. There's a couple basics in there for the Fabled Passages.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's... I mean, that's the thing, right? All these lands are very good, but sometimes the drawback is that you take way too much damage over the course of a game.
So as we usually see, the Dreadhorde Butchers might come out, since Seth is going to be on the draw this game.
Yep. But yeah. That was a game where you have access to Leyline of the Void to stop quite a bit of Seth's synergy. I mean, the Midnight Reapers could have been much more relevant and just didn't do anything as a result. So it wasn't like Leyline, like it looked like it did nothing, but it was actually really relevant. It was just that Reid couldn't find any other interaction. There wasn't a way to get rid of the Dreadhorde Butcher efficiently, right? Maelstrom Pulse is fine, but it's a free mana card.
Going into Game 3 of this round 11. Both of these players have had a pretty good weekend so far, racking up points. And they're playing some good decks, so it does make sense. There are really 3 decks that have dominated this weekend, both between Rivals and the MPL, being Sultai, Jund, and Gruul. And if you're playing one of those, there's a good chance that you've gotten some wins.
To be fair, I mean, Luis went 1-5 and Sivka went 5-1, and both of them played very similar decks. It's worth pointing out still that at the end of the day, you're playing high-level Magic with a bunch of other high-level Magic competitors. So, and the matchups are close. There's no free wins, really, here. Unless you're putting mulligans to 4 or something.
Well, we saw one mull to 5 that resulted in victory.
Yeah.
Not too many close and crazy games. So lots of good mana fixing for both players. That means that this is definitely going to be an interactive game of Magic. I'm taking a peek at the hands here. We've got Growth Spiral for Reid Duke, an Aether Gust, and a future turn. And Seth, I mean, with Phyrexian Tower, one of those cats might get turned into mana next turn. Or even this turn. A turn 2 Woe Strider sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah, you could sacrifice the Colone's Familiar and play a Woe Strider. Might be worth it, but it's not like Woe Strider is dealing that much extra pressure. The only reason to do this is not so much that you want to deal extra pressure. It's that Scavenging Ooze is much better later. It's better once you get rid of an Uro. If you just expose the Scavenging Ooze, it's either going to do nothing here because it just doesn't deal much damage, or it's going to be a relevant card, and Reid will do the effort to remove it. We'll take the time and effort to remove it.
And Reid Duke, with only the Aether Gusts in hand, didn't shock in to hold up both of them because it is extremely unlikely that 2 targets would come down, seeing as the only red and green cards cost 2 and 3 mana.
Yeah, unless you think Gilded Goose is around and you really need to deal with it.
Yeah, it's the goose. Gotta deal with that goose.
Yep. I mean, I agree. Philosophically, I can only agree with that statement.
I spent this morning walking by a river, and there were both swans and geese harassing the locals. What nice animals.
Yeah, Seth deciding not to run another Woe Strider just because it'd be so weak to Cry of the Carnarium. In this spot, if Reid had 1 Aether Gust, this would be a close decision. I think with 2, it strongly is incentivized to... Reid is strongly incentivized to just kind of let this happen. To actually cast the Gust, I meant, sorry. And because you need to use up your cards at some point. You want the board to be relatively clear. The only decision there really from Reid is, do I let the ooze resolve so that Seth is incentivized to creep green mana up or not? And decides not to use the Gust, which is really interesting because next turn you have access to Nissa. And I don't think you can have Gust twice. So Reid is considering this game for a much, much longer point because Nissa plus Gust was still going to be available. So it's playing around Thoughtseize potentially and is considering the value of Gust later into the game.
Playing the big, bad Doom Whisperer. This is the sort of situation where I really wish that Seth had some Angraths in the board. I remember seeing those yesterday and loving them.
Yeah, Angrath the Flame Chained, not in Seth Manfield's list, but I think a really heads-up choice for this tournament. When I saw the 2 copies in Simon Gertson's sideboard, I immediately was very appreciative of that card choice. Seth deciding to put that counter on Scavenging Ooze, because with Mayhem Devil in hand and Woe Strider, there's an okay chance to essentially attack with Ooze here through the 6/6. Because this early on, Reid is still at 15 life, and you need to be able to put pressure on to Reid. Otherwise, Reid can kind of just run away with the game, just focus on the board, not have to make any committing plays, and just leave the interaction until it's at its most devastating. When you are aggressive as possible, that forces Reid's hand a little bit and makes the cards have less impact.
Ooh, swinging in, showing that you've got maybe a trick or maybe a bluff. There's the ability to get double black mana off that Phyrexian Tower. Trying to think if 3 damage plus 3 off the Mayhem Devil.
It's possible.
We'll
so
take out this Doom
you play the
Whisperer.
red source, Mayhem Devil, sacrifice the goat to tower. That's 1 extra damage. Then you play Familiar and Oven, sacrifice the cat. That's 1 more, and then you bring back the cats. That's full free.
Yeah, that is a tricky sequence, but I definitely can see Seth pulling it off. Time to turn the goat into mana.
Yep.
And that Doom Whisperer is no more.
I mean, this is a pretty high sequence of cards. Like, it's a little unlikely. So Reid could have easily put Seth on, not bluffing so much, but, like, wait, is there really something like an Braid that come in? That's a bit weird. But at least with this, Seth does tap out, and this is a good spot to try to pay some life, maybe for an Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath.
If one shows up.
I mean, you could try and surveil into it.
With only 11 life left, though, it's definitely risky. I noticed that most of the Japanese players we saw were very, very liberal in how much they surveilled, really putting their life totals down as low as they could go to fill up the graveyard.
Yeah, this is a matchup where, it's less worth it. And with access to Nissa, you don't need to. Oh, also, we have language. There we go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you just top deck language. Easy.
Yeah, one of the Cry of the Carnarium here would have done very little. Language is great in that it allows Reid to essentially sweep the board and potentially keep up Gust. That is at the cost of 2 life. And not that, and it only really stops something like Mayhem Devil. So you might not see Reid want to spend that 2 life here because there's not that much that it interacts with that positively. Maybe something like a Dreadhood Butcher, but that's not even that relevant. So with 2 breeding pools, I'm not surprised to see Reid not want to pay the life and just stay at 10. I think that's heads up here.
I don't think that a Mayhem Devil would be making too much of an impact on the board if that were the only thing drawn. And it could always be Aether Gusted the next turn, because of course it could hit a permanent instead of something on the stack.
Right. Plus, you already saw Witch's Oven. Obviously, the second one makes that more real with Cauldron's Familiar. So any creature with Cauldron's Familiar starts becoming a problem. At this point, Reid really needs an Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, because that's one of the few cards that is going to allow essentially to break up this cat synergy. Seth, by the way, going for this right now because you don't want to run into Kaldheim of the Carnarium.
The cat returns. And will the cat die and return again?
It'll probably return later, but it'll definitely die now.
Goodbye, Cauldron Familiar.
Don't worry, we'll see it again. I'm not worried about. I'm not worried. I believe Cauldron Familiar will come back to haunt us.
It's the cat that comes back the very next day. It is impossible to get rid of. And here is Nissa, who shakes the world. Nissa going to animate a land, turning it into a 3/3 to contest with that Woast Rider.
Yeah, that said, redrawing a land here is pretty bad, and also Aether Gust is a very conditional card.
Aether Gust could hit Nissa here. That's it.
Yeah, that's the choice. Reid actually wants Seth to, well, either draw actually a land might. I guess there's Phyrexian Tower, so it's not that clear. But draw a land or a red spell, because a red spell would mean that a good red spell, because the Aether Gust would keep putting that spell on the top. Midnight Reaper is exactly what Reid did not want to see.
Nice. But this is fantastic for Seth because it's going to turn those Cat Oven cycles into card draw. And we see a careful tapping here, leaving up the red mana source. And the Midnight Reaper coming down before the Witch's Oven recycles that cat. And at 24 life, Seth has plenty of resources to work with. I also do like the attack here with the cat to just say, oh, yeah, I can. You're not going to block it.
Might block the Woast Strider. Well, I'm probably forced
so that
to
was
block
just
the
getting in that extra damage.
Yeah. Definitely has to block the Woast Strider here.
Ooh, Dreadhorde Butcher might be nice for next turn. It does kind of run into a land at this point in the game, though. Not super useful, but on death, it does have a devastating secondary punch.
Yep. That's where these Aether Gusts are going to start being relevant. Reid needs Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, and sooner rather than later. I think Cry of the Carnarium would kind of work. Hydroid Krasis as well with Nissa in play. Just really needs something of that ilk. Something that can essentially take over the board, gain life. And it turns out that the cards in Reid's deck that do both things. So you just need one of the two.
The only thing I'd be afraid of with a Hydroid Krasis is it getting flamed and swung back in your face. Wow, that's nothing, Reid. That's just 3 Aether Gusts.
Yeah, and that's also why we've seen some players when sideboarding not bring in all their Aether Gusts in a matchup like this, is because of how conditional it can be. And, going back to the decision not to use Aether Gust on Scavenging Ooze, like, sure, the Scavenging Ooze died to languish, but that Ooze was in play, it dealt damage, and every life point for Reid matters a ton now. Reid has essentially a turn.
So I do like that the island is just going to hold the board right now. The triple Aether Gust here, yeah, there's just not enough targets for it. Even though there are 2 red cards in hand for Seth, he could only play out one of them unless he draws another red source. And Midnight Reaper might be the card draw to reveal another red source. We'll find out.
Yeah. You could play Millennium Devil to present lethal, because then you're going to redraw it right away, and it's definitely a relevant card. Obviously, Reid is forced to counter this.
Yep. Do you think we're going to see the same Mayhem Devil gusted twice during this turn? It's all about that red source, but I want to know, do you think it will happen?
It's unlikely, but it could happen.
I want to see it.
Yeah.
I want to see the Mayhem Devil that could.
I kind of want to see an Uro drawn so we can have this game last longer. Or maybe a Hydroid Krasis. Hydroid Krasis would be maybe cooler.
Cat's coming back. Another life drained.
Yeah, the fact that Cauldron's Familiar is also drawing a card in this process really... And that's why Leyline of the Void is important in this matchup. This interaction right here with a Leyline in play would be absolutely non-existent.
Another red source?
Yep.
Dragon Skull Summit with one of the draws, which means that the Mayhem Devil may land. Or Seth could play it safe, keep it back for next turn. Here comes Mayhem Devil. Come on, play it out. You know you want to.
The thing is, if it lands in play, it's probably lights out for Reid. But yeah, with 2 Witch's Oven used up, you could wait. Dreadhood Butcher is also a must answer. Reid also, actually, Leyline of the Void would be an interesting top deck because it kind of shuts down most of this. It doesn't shut down all of it. There's still creatures in play, but it would allow Kaldheim's Familiar only to come back once. It would make Dreadhood Butcher not do anything. And Reid's considering whether to Aethergust this Butcher or not, and the answer is probably have to.
He did. He also has 1 spare Aethergust. I'm sad that my mental energy I was sending to Seth to play out that Mayhem Devil didn't quite work. Even though it would have made him more susceptible to Cry to Carnarium and similar effects, I just wanted it to happen. I'm all about the don't bother playing around your opponent's outs. Assume you're going to win.
Yeah, Reid needs a okay. That's it. So
Reid needs something that does something. This is an Aethergust. And Reid Duke can animate a land here and make another blocker, but the Mayhem Devil is going to end up on the battlefield next turn.
Yep, and that's gonna spell it out because you get to return the Kaldheim's Familiar. One of Mayhem Devil or Dreadhood Butcher is going to resolve now, with Reid's last card being that third Aethergust. And yeah, Midnight Reaper was really key here. That was probably the draw that Seth needed to go over the game. But that said, Reid didn't draw that spectacularly well at the end, so maybe even just the Kaldheim's Familiar might have been enough to take over. And yeah, I going back to that decision on Scavenging, I don't think it would have mattered much just because of how this game panned out.
Hi, Mayhem Devil. Mayhem Devil landing on the battlefield, and now the Cat Oven cycle is going to do some serious damage and close out this game. Reid Duke losing to Seth Manfield. Seth Manfield, love to see the Jund Sacrifice win against the big bad Earl who never showed up.
Yeah, that was actually the key there was in that match. I think the key moment was not Aethergusting the Scavenging Ooze, which meant that Reid Duke was incentivized to block the Woe Strider with the Doom